gentlemen, and welcome back to Tech Showdown. My name is Kevin, this is Teddy, and today we're doing our first Mini-ITX Showdown, GPU Showdown, with the Gigabyte, I call it the 1X, Mini-ITX GTX 960, this little guy here, up against the Asus GTX 960 Mini. So this one will be quite interesting. Obviously, Mini-ITX builds have sort of come up a bit more in popularity in sort of the last few years, which I think is quite cool. They definitely have a place, and you know, some of them do look really nice as well. I like some of the cases coming out, and overall, they're quite a cool thing. It's still a bit of a niche, I'd say, market in some ways, but I mean, we're obviously seeing a lot more products dedicated just for Mini-ITX, so it's good to see them kind of rise in popularity. Now, the differences between these guys. So they're both running the GM206 Maxwell GPU. So, I mean, we talked about this so many times, there's no point going over it another time. They both feature 2 GB GDDR5 on a 128-bit bus, both at 7010 MHz. Now, the only difference really with these guys comes in with the different GPU speeds themselves. So they're obviously rated for different speeds, but that doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, with GPU Boost 2.0, they will automatically overclock higher anyways. So the highest overclock I saw out of the Gigabyte Mini GTX 960 was 1303 MHz. So that was the highest. Where on the Asus it went all the way up to 1354 MHz. So a little bit more there, with 51 MHz more on the Asus, so just a little bit extra. Obviously these guys have different coolers as well. They also have different I/Os. So on the Gigabyte we're seeing a sort of substandard one where you just get a single display port, single HDMI port, albeit they're both gold plated, which is cool. DVI-I and DVI-D connections, whereas the Asus follows more the NVIDIA reference with the triple display port, single HDMI port, and single DVI-I connection. Now, where the coolers differ the most, I find, I mean, there's the fact that the Gigabyte doesn't have a backplate where the Asus does, so that's another thing. Both of these just have the single SLI fingers because you can go up 2 SLI, and the single 6-pin power connectors on them. Is that it's just a chopped down version of what we see on the other WindForce models, basically. But this one is quite chopped down. It only has 2 heat pipes sitting on an aluminium heatsink. It's got their same fan design, this new one that the Gigabyte said is very good, and I do believe it. Which they say increases airflow while cutting down on fan noise with all these ridges cut out on it and all that good stuff. Both these cards also have their upgraded components which give better lifespans and better overclocking and all that fun stuff. Where the Asus card has their Cooltech fan, which we used to see on previous model Direct C2 coolers, but we didn't see on this generation of it. They got rid of it and brought in a whole new fan design, same as what Gigabyte did. Interesting that they went back to their old fan design for this Mini-ITX card. So yeah, they got the Cooltech fan, which is basically a hybrid fan, which is why it looks kind of funny. So it pushes some of the air through the heat sinks, well in this case, yeah, through and kind of outwards, and also throws the air out, which helps exhaust some of it out the back. But because both of these are open cards, then the majority of the air will just be inside the case. It also has the kind of mushroom style, which is a more very traditional old style of heatsink design, which is quite cool to see, and we'll be talking about temps later on, so you'll be able to see how they perform. As I said before, it has that really nice backplate, which I really do like, so that's also a good thing. Now, size-wise, the Gigabyte card's coming in at 42mm tall to the 46mm of the Asus card. That is probably due to the Asus card having a backplate. Now, lengthwise, the Gigabyte card's coming in at 181mm long, whereas the Asus card is coming in at 170mm long. However, that's possibly due to the way, now this is a funny thing they do in the industry, sometimes they put size up which don't include the bracket at the back of the card, or some say it could be the front of the card. So Gigabyte's ones in this case do, and Asus's don't. But yeah, size-wise, they are incredibly close together. And width-wise, it's coming in at 136mm wide for the Gigabyte card and 122mm wide for the Asus card, which is kind of mind-blowing because if I look at them, the Asus card looks much wider than the Gigabyte card, actually. But regardless, they're both tiny, so I don't think it's really going to matter at the end of the day. They're both really, really tiny cards, so they're going to fit in pretty much any Mini-ITX case that you can think of, or build you can think of. Now, with all that out of the way, let's just jump straight into the benchmarks then. And where else will we start but Unigine Heaven 4.0. This is DirectX 11. So the Gigabyte Mini-ITX GTX 960 scored 32.3 frames per second average, where the Asus GTX 960 Mini scored 32.9 frames per second average, so there's nothing in it, really. Now Heaven again, this time in OpenGL, everything maxed out, 1080p. The Gigabyte GTX 960 Mini, 29.8 frames per second average. The Asus GTX 960 Mini, 30.3 frames per second average, so tiny difference there again. Heaven's kept them very, very close together. Now to some games. So Tomb Raiders, everything maxed out without VSync. The Gigabyte 960, 58 frames per second average. The Asus 960, 59.4 frames per second average. Now to Bioshock Infinite. This is on user setting 2. The Gigabyte 960, 74.3 frames per second average. The Asus 960, 74.8 frames per second average, so also nothing. And finally, Shadow of Mordor. The Gigabyte GTX 960 Mini scored 38.1 frames per second average. This is on the Ultra preset, remember, 1080p. And the Asus GTX 960 Mini scored 39.1 frames per second average. So what can we tell from these benchmarks? Well, the Asus card is clocked slightly higher, so that would, I mean, that explains why there's like half a frame in most of these difference, but they're pretty much the same. More telling is what games they do good on and what games they don't do good on. So Tomb Raider, pretty much, if you want to be gaming at above 30 frames, you're probably going to need to just turn down one of the filters and then you could run on Ultra just fine. Bioshock Infinite, you're going to be able to max it out with no worries at all. And Shadow of Mordor, which is a beast, you're probably going to have to turn down some of the things, maybe run it on high instead of Ultra, and that should get you by very, very well. Now, benchmarks wise, I'm sure most of you aren't surprised by them being so similar. These are the same GPUs in them and not much difference in clock speed. However, temperatures, that's what a lot of people are interested in, how these guys perform in terms of temps. So we'll start with the Gigabyte Mini GTX 960. So in the Unigine Valley benchmark, the highest temperature it went up to was 70 degrees Celsius, and that's at 47% fan speed. So that's a pretty decent effort. I mean, these obviously aren't going to cool as well as the Big Brothers, but it's still pretty good. The Asus GTX 960 Mini, on the other hand, scored 65 degrees Celsius at 50% fan speed in the same benchmark. So 3% higher fan speed for 5 degrees cooler, so I guess we can say this time it was a win for the Asus in terms of its cooling performance. I also took the temperatures during the Unigine Heaven 4.0 benchmark, and the Gigabyte 960 went all the way up to 71 degrees Celsius, whereas the Asus 960 went up to 67 degrees Celsius. So what we're seeing from that is the Asus is going to cool slightly better. You know, you're probably going to see, on average, around 5, but between, I'd say, 4 and 5 4 or 5 Celsius better on the Asus Mini. That isn't really going to mean anything in the real world. However, if you want to be overclocking, then it will give you that slightly more thermal headroom, although it was running at a tiny bit higher fan speed, so you have to consider that. But yeah, quite interesting given that they discontinued this Cooltech fan on their main models, and also just the design of the heatsink itself is kind of a blast from the past on the Asus one, but it seems to work out really good, so that's nice to see. Now, temperatures aren't everything. What about noise? So let's get straight into that then. Noise-wise, both of these cards at idle are going to be just dead silent, so you're not going to have to worry about that at all. You know, they're going to be great. You're not going to be getting any noise out of them. However, when you start gaming and loading up the GPUs, you will notice a little bit of difference between these guys. I can honestly say that both of them are still very quiet. However, the Gigabyte card is slightly quieter than the Asus card, so that was quite interesting. That new fan design, it seems, on the Gigabyte card really does help out compared to the older Cooltech fan design on the Asus card. But as always, I'll let you guys judge for yourself. So this is what both of the cards sound like on load during the Unigine Valley benchmark. So the Gigabyte card is up first. And here is the Asus card. So a bit of difference there. You see on the decibel meter, it's quite a bit higher for the Asus card. Just personal opinion from using them, you do notice that the Gigabyte card is slightly quieter. But honestly, that's not to say the Asus card is really loud or anything. I mean, it's no reference 290 or 290X here. So you're not going to have to worry about that. Both these cards are going to be fairly quiet for the most part. Nothing that game noises are going to, game noise will drown it out very easily. So I don't think you need to worry about it at all in that sense. Which leads us now to the conclusion. So the good points being with the Asus that overall I think it's the better built card. You get a nicer backplate. The I/O is what I'd call better in my opinion. The reference design, well, there's just more to pick from, I suppose, and more support if you want to do different things. Like if you really want to do triple G-Sync monitors off this guy or whatever it might be. Not only that, it did slightly higher in the benchmarks, although, you could just overclock the Gigabyte one up a little bit higher. But from standard, the Asus card is clocked slightly higher. Temperatures-wise, it did a bit better, and only noise-wise did it fail out, which was the main area where I thought the Gigabyte card did quite well. The other thing to note is price-wise, the Gigabyte card is coming in slightly cheaper. In New Zealand, I believe it's about $20 on average cheaper for this card over the Asus. Which leads me now to the conclusion, and which one of these wins. Honestly, I just gotta say the Asus. Yeah, it might be $20 more expensive, and it might be slightly louder, but overall, I just think it is the better card. It feels better built, it looks better with the backplate. I believe it would be better in terms of, reliability and overclocking, just from what I've heard around the block right now. But at the end of the day, that is just a personal opinion, and I don't think the difference between these guys is that much. I would say this Asus card wins, but it's only like a 5% better victory, over the Gigabyte card. So I think you'd be fairly happy with either of these cards, although if someone said you have to pick one right now, I'd be picking the Asus over the Gigabyte. However, if there's more of a price difference than say $20, then just go for the Gigabyte. Say this is like $30 more expensive, then no way, go for the Gigabyte, because there honestly isn't that much difference between them. Now, I thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you liked my first Mini-ITX Showdown. I'm thinking of maybe doing the GTX960 Mini-ITX Showdown, but let me know in the comments below if you want to see more Mini-ITX stuff, because I know a lot of you probably aren't as interested. Most people don't run Mini-ITX rigs, but let me know if you're just interested anyways. It'd be nice to know what you guys are thinking. Now, thank you all for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.